Okay, all right, so thanks for that, Millie, and I really enjoyed your poem yesterday, and though I do try and avoid using the F word publicly, it has passed my lips quite a lot. And I did enjoy the piss take on Julia Gillard's misogyny speak, so well done. That was great, and all the other speakers yesterday. So Leonard Cohen in his 1992 anthem sang, ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And that's how we felt as New Zealand Women's Rights Party members when the coalition agreement was signed off that formed the basis of the new government, which was sworn in late last year. And so Katrina Biggs, who's a Substack blogger and she's a Women's Rights Party member, she wrote it was the first disruptions in the flow of gender ideology into our schools, our universities, public services, sporting bodies here in New Zealand. And that's because 4 really significant commitments are in that coalition agreement. The first is to get rid of gender ideology from our school curriculum. The second is to ensure that publicly funded sporting bodies support fair competition that's not compromised by rules relating to gender, and already they've brought that in. No funding if there's gender rules. Thirdly, protect freedom of speech by ruling out bringing in hate speech legislation. And fourthly, amending the Education Training Act so that tertiary education providers, universities, or like your TAFEs as well, if they get taxpayer funding, they have to commit to a free speech policy. So women can indeed ring the bells, but there's still much to be done to reclaim our voice and stop the erosion of sex-based rights. Because over the past 6 years, and largely under the radar, lobby groups funded by the government to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars, the previous Labour government, have pushed an agenda that's put the rights of women at risk, while at the same time women's voices have been shut down in our universities, public services. You're very familiar with all this, I know, the mainstream media and in our unions. Jobs have been put at risk if people dare to question gender ideology. And the ironic thing is that's in the name of inclusivity, and we're all being excluded from public debate and our rights eroded as a result of it. We had a Prime Minister that preached kindness. There's the kindness that we got at Albert Park. There are good reasons why women and children's rights are protected in policy and law, and that of course includes our right to single-sex spaces such as toilets or changing sheds, and also single-sex services such as rape crisis and women's registered refuges, which have been defunded. Oh, someone's trying to come in the back door. They've been defunded if they don't let men who identify as women into the refuge. So let's be clear, most men don't want to go into women's spaces, and most men don't commit violence against women, but some do. And how do we know who's who? And that's why we have women-only spaces in the first place. So we called on the incoming government as soon as they got sworn in to drop a Green MP's bill that would add gender identity and expression to the Human Rights Act, which is what we were talking about yesterday with your 2013 amendment. And it's really dangerous for lots of reasons, but one of them I explained yesterday in terms of whose rights take precedence, women or people who identify as women but are men. So that bill passed its first reading in the last days of the previous Labour government, was brought in by a woman called Dr. Elizabeth Kerekere. She got chucked out of Parliament. She was a Green MP. She was very nasty, and called Chloe Swarbrick, who's likely to be the new co-leader, a crybaby, in a tweet that accidentally went to everybody. Another such bill, introduced by a former Labour Party MP, Tamati Coffey, would remove the birth mother as the first legal parent in the case of surrogacy. So we oppose this, obviously. Right now, the birth mother gives birth to the baby and the intending couple or person has to adopt the baby, which is usually a 6-month process. And so we've also called on the incoming government to quietly shelve it, which they can do. We're also calling for a ban on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones being prescribed to children with gender dysphoria. And a ban on gender reassignment surgery for those under 18 years of age. We might take it up a bit because we're doing a round with members right now across the country. And it used to be 21 in New Zealand, and you had to go through counselling, and it generally took 3 years before you could get it. So 24 was the magic figure then. But we tried to push through as Labour women. 100 plus Labour women in Auckland voted on an amendment to make gender reassignment surgery illegal if you're under 18, and the Labour Party wouldn't even let that go to the conference for debate. So that's one of the reasons I left. So the other thing, of course, we want repeal of self-ID. That was overwhelmingly opposed by people who submitted to Parliament. The Labour and Greens women MPs who sat on the Select Committee treated the women who submitted with absolute disdain, rolling their eyes. And Deborah Russell, a Labour MP from Auckland, got caught out putting a tweet out there about how she had to have a wine when she got home because it was so terrible listening to these awful TERFs. We want a review of the Prostitution Reform Act, including our opposition to calls by the Green Party and others to repeal Section 19, which prevents those on temporary visas, such as student visas, from international students engaging in the sex trade. They want to get rid of that ban, because they say they're exploited because it's illegal for them to engage in the sex trade, therefore they can't complain if something goes wrong. Well, they're not supposed to be doing it. And so we oppose that. And we also advocate for funding to help women who want to leave prostitution to find alternative work. We also want a ban on rough sex being used as a defence in the case of murder. They've just recently done this in the UK. And this has come to light after the young British tourist Grace Millane had the life squeezed out of her, literally in Auckland, and the guy had done it to lots of women, but he hadn't managed to actually didn't kill others. And then finally, well not finally, because we've got lots of things on our agenda, but we want to scrap the revised midwifery scope of practice, which was recently reviewed by the regulatory body, and it erases the word woman from pregnancy, labour and birthing, with no mention of supporting women in breastfeeding. All roles that, there is a midwife here, you would, I can't see you, yes.
I think it's a couple of us actually.
Yeah.
Some of
So we supported a petition of one of our members, Deb Hayes, who's a midwife, and it got 7,500 signatures in the space of just a few weeks. And it was to call on the parliamentary inquiry into the Midwifery Council. Because if you read that scope of practice, there's no way you could know what your boundaries are in terms of your practice as a midwife. Because it talks about whānau, which is a te reo Māori word that generally means the wider family. And in the scope of practice it talks about being responsible for sexual and reproductive health of the whānau. You've got to be kidding. Uncle Ted, you know, it's just ridiculous. But yesterday, International Women's Day, the Midwifery Council was prevailed upon by our new Minister of Health to have another look. And women is back in, but it's women/person/whānau. So we're there. But it's just ridiculous. So it's this insidious erasure of women from our language that piqued my attention a few years ago when I was on the National Affiliates Council of the Council of Trade Women, and we were looking at the strategic plan, and there was no mention of the word women, and I just put my hand up, honestly, totally innocent. Is that a typo? Because women seems to be missing from the equity. It had equity for Māori, equity for Pasifika people, it had equity for people with disabilities, people from different ethnicities, but no mention of women. Then I noticed it said people of different gender identities, so I said, unless you're planning to cover women under people of different gender identities, there was absolute silence. So this was followed by the health sector. I was working at the time for the Midwives Union, and NGOs calling us cervix havers, menstruators, birthing people and other such nonsense. While we have a month-long campaign on all of our TV and radio and everything for prostate cancer, which mentions men all the time. And there's even an ad on TV for weight loss supplements for real men. Imagine if we put up an advertisement aimed at real women. So, you know, from my point of view, this is how I got involved. I'm not prepared to yield the word woman as an adult human female who does get periods and can choose to be a mother or not, and does have health issues that men do not, like endometriosis, which is a major problem in New Zealand. Well, probably here as well, because health for women is not prioritised. So we formed the Women's Rights Party last year within days of the absolutely shocking violence, and I've got the video clip, but it's not on here, but you've probably seen it. It was just unbelievable. It was noise torture, and you experienced it in Melbourne and Hobart. And because they were calling us Nazis, I wanted to go along and say, I am a woman of the left, I am not a Nazi. Don't you know your history? Don't you know what Nazis did to communist women and their children? They put them into concentration camps and they killed them. So, but I didn't get to, because they pushed over the barriers and they came forward, and it's so traumatic that it's really hard to sort of relive, because I also went over to the barriers as they were being pushed over, and then I saw the anger, absolute anger in their faces, and so I got pushed back towards the rotunda. Anyway, we were absolutely traumatised, and that night my friend Dawn and I, Dawn has been very involved in the Labour Party, was a local body, well, she wasn't just a candidate, she was a local body, you know, councillor. And she and I said, she was saying, I'm not going to vote. And I said, oh, you can't do that. And then she said, I'm going to vote for National. And I said, oh, you can't do that. We'll have to form a women's rights party so that we can have someone to vote for, even if it's just you and me. So that's what we did, but we had to get 500 financial members who were entitled to vote in New Zealand, and we had to go through absolute rigmarole to get registered to be on the ballot, and it took us till August to do it. By that time we had 740 members. So we held a conference in June, and members approved a constitution, which we have to have as a registered political party, and our policy platform, which I've got down the back there in a pamphlet, which you're all welcome to take. I don't want to take those ones back home. We also, as you said, contested the 2023 general election with a list of 12 absolutely courageous women who put their names forward. And they include women who you may have heard of: Prue Hyman, a leading feminist economist from New Zealand; Karen Gilliland, who was the CE of the College of Midwives; and I've mentioned there Mani Farnisek, who was an international kayaker and whitewater rafter for New Zealand, has been very active. It's on her canoe, No Men and Women's Sports. But I just I wanted to say that the New Zealand system of proportional representation allows for this opportunity because you get 2 votes. One is for the person you want to represent you in your electorate, and the other is for the party you would like to see represented in Parliament. And so we didn't have to stand electorate candidates, we could just stand what's called a list. And so, but to be in Parliament, the party has to get 5% of the vote, or win an electoral seat. And those are really high bars. So to get the 5%, you had to get 142,500 votes, and we got 2,513. But we knew we wouldn't make it into Parliament. That's not why we stood. By registering as a political party and having our logo and name on the ballot paper in every polling booth in the whole of New Zealand, gave those women and men who could no longer vote for Labour or the Greens, or in some cases the National Party, a choice on the ballot, but it was a choice that was clearly of the left. Because there are parties that are involved in gender critical issues that are clearly of the right that we maybe wouldn't want to vote for. Anyway, but we talk to each other. So having our logo on the ballot mattered, but more importantly, we wanted to build party organisation around the country and get our members out sign waving, leafleting markets and shopping centres, and I see we've gone right past that, and dropping banners over the motorways, and our National Suffrage Day activities in September all laid the foundation for the party going forward. And as you can see, as a result of an initiative by Juanita here, we put our billboards on a van I bought, and we went all around the country, and we had local meetings at cafes, we stayed at people's houses, and we had regional meetings, and we elected people to be on our council, and we elected list candidates, and we built party organisation. We're about to do another round when I get back after Easter. So, of course, it was an opportunity to draw attention to our issues as gender critical women, because things in New Zealand have been pretty dire, and millions of dollars of government funding have gone into NGOs, and they've had a huge influence. They've totally captured the public sector, including our health and education systems. So you know, this is a country where it was the first self-governing country in the world for women to win the vote. I always object when people say they gave the women the vote. They did not give it to them. They tried several times. They went out, they door-knocked, they campaigned, they got a huge petition which they rolled up on a broomstick and laid out over Parliament. They won the right to vote. And they lobbied, and, you know, and they got it. So, who would have thought we would have to fight again 130 years later to defend our rights as women and to protect our children? So, however, the new government is a coalition of the right, and we have serious concerns about its direction. They're making cuts in public services that are going to hurt women and children. The government announced just this last week they intend to cut the free food in schools, which is feeding a quarter of New Zealand school children in our poorest communities. They scrapped the fair pay agreements, which will impact mostly on low-paid women workers. They've ruled out a plan that Labour had to extend the free 20 hours free childcare to 2-year-olds, which again affects lower paid women workers. They're getting tough on solo mums, and that will hurt women and their children. The Labour government got rid of sanctions that meant women who were getting the domestic purposes benefit could not have a relationship. And those sanctions are coming back. There are so many issues for women that need to be addressed, and of course just this Monday, a judge discharged a thug who smashed a woman's eye socket in a violent attack on the 25th of March last year at the Auckland Let Women Speak event. And women across New Zealand should be very concerned about this because it was a violent, unprovoked attack, and it sends a chilling message to women in our country where male violence on women is endemic and is often diminished in its severity and impact on the victim. The judge said the offending was moderately serious, and a conviction would make it difficult for the man to find employment. And he also accepted that the man was neurodiverse.
Sorry?
I know. So what happened to the attacker's victim, Judith? It wasn't a moderate injury. We've all seen the video footage. As Judith staggered forward after being hit from behind, he came in and he laid into her with 3 crack punches. Well, probably got the wrong word, but there is a word for that. And vicious. And you could see the anger written all over his face. And Judith has suffered ever since. She doesn't go outside her house, hardly ever. She has to take sleeping pills to sleep at night. And I'm not surprised because I was there, and it was just horrific. We had seen what happened in Melbourne, where your police at least showed up on horseback and tried to keep a separation. I know it wasn't the same in Hobart, but the police just were nowhere to be seen. I was shouting at a TV reporter next to me, "Where are the police?" I couldn't see any sign of any police anywhere. And you have to wonder whether this man and many of the others who were there turned up because they were looking for a fight. I saw neo-Nazis there among the so-called trans rights activists, and I'm pretty sure they don't give a stuff about trans rights. They were there to beat up on us. And I left the event when it became obvious the police were not going to take any action, because we were sitting ducks, and from where I was, right in front of the rotunda, you just couldn't see them anywhere. And so that violence against women is just one of the many issues. Someone asked yesterday, what should we do first? We feel like whack-a-mole. You know that toy, you whack it and then something else pops up and you whack that, something else. And so unfortunately, some of the fights are internal amongst the movement. And we're trying desperately as a Women's Rights Party not to take sides. There's massive disagreements happening right now over the organisation of the Let Women Speak event a year ago, when instead of us fighting the police and the politicians who whipped up the frenzy in the week between Melbourne and Auckland, there are concerns also about Kellie J. Keen's desire to set up an international party of women led by her from the UK. While most of us admire the concept of letting women speak, and we do admire the fact that she has raised this issue, we don't appreciate that we need someone, with due respect to anybody who's from Britain, to come over to New Zealand to tell us, to save us on the assumption that we're weak, because we're not. And I know that Australian women are not weak either. It's acts of colonialism. We've been involved in these issues for years, and within our unions, fighting within our unions. We've been cancelled by our friends. Within our public organisations, and particularly, we've been left as political refugees from our parties, particularly Labour and the Greens. It's interesting what you were saying about the Animal Rights Party, because I said, as long as we get more votes than the Animal Rights Party to show that people care more about women than they do about animals, but no, we didn't. Anyway, we've got differences of opinion within our party as well about whether climate change should be part of our agenda, about what's happening to women and children in Gaza, about moves by this government to roll back gains around Māori issues. And just last week, the coalition government scrapped the Māori Health Authority that had been set up to try and turn around years of disastrous Māori health outcomes. Māori live way shorter time than Pākehā New Zealanders. So even the question of whether to push for the Nordic model in stopping the demand for prostitution, or reviewing and reforming our New Zealand model, which is a decriminalisation model for prostitution, and tightening up on stopping the exploitation, is potentially divisive. So we're currently calling for policy proposals to raise these and other issues, and people are allowed to submit their policy proposals, and we're taking them around the country, and we will be discussing these at local and regional meetings, and that will culminate in voting at the annual conference, which is our process. So I imagine it's going to be challenging as to how we respond to issues beyond transgenderism as a party that is clearly pro-women's rights and clearly of the left. It's true we don't want men in our changing sheds or competing unfairly in women's sports, but we also want women's health to be prioritised. And we want more support for women who are victims of violence and sexual assault. And we want better income support for women and children, affordable childcare, pay equity claims settled in a timely fashion, and superannuation that ensures dignity for women as we age. Our legislative agenda calls for repeal of self-sex ID, restrictions on the use of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones and gender reassignment surgery with children. And our policies include law reform, as I've talked about, in the area of prostitution, pornography and surrogacy, as well as the protection of sex-based rights in our human rights legislation. But how do we deal with issues that challenge our society, like economic policies, climate change, race relations, and international human rights that have the potential to divide us? And so my question is, can we get political as gender-critical feminists while ignoring social and economic issues that impact on women and children? And that's what I want to talk to you about in our workshop this afternoon. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you think before I go out and find out what our members think about all this. Well, I already know because there's quite a bit on Facebook. Anyway, so thank you very much. That was supposed to be the same time.